Welcome to this Sunday morning extra podcast for Hope Church. We just got finished with the first message of 2023, and there was a lot in that message, and so much that we wanted to provide this for you, just to go a little bit deeper on some stuff we weren't able to cover on Sunday morning. So, hi, Pastor Matt.
Hey, Brian. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So you went through several aspects of what having a fully engaged relationship with Jesus looks like. And let's start with like reading the Bible and attending church when I'm in town and a whole bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you could go a little bit deeper on a few of those that you weren't able to, with the time allotted on Sunday morning, to get into.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was, the challenging thing about our spiritual growth is it's not just about checking things off of a list, but yet we got to have some type of a list to, like, what are the kinds of things I should be doing, So that's what we tried to do with the activities that fuel spiritual growth. So I intentionally spent the most time on the first one. I regularly read the Bible and pray because I really believe that, we should be doing all of them on the list, but if you can only do one, or where you're going to start, really, probably is the better way to say it, is with reading the Bible and praying, because we each of us, we have our own individual relationship with Jesus. There's a communal aspect of it, but at the end of the day, it is us and Jesus from the standpoint of I am responsible for my own growth. As the church, we want to help people grow. We can't make anybody grow. We've never been able to cause anybody to grow. We've been able to give them some tools. We've been able to point them in the right direction. We've been able to help answer questions. We've been able to help aid in the process. But at the end of the day, all the excuses go away. It's just like, what am I going to do? So spent a lot of time on the first one, reading the Bible and praying, and then, obviously a lot more could be said. So I do want to just for those, maybe hopefully everybody heard the message, but if they didn't, I do want to kind of make the disclaimer here that in the list there is Hope Church listed quite a bit, and that's not because you can only do those here, but part of being a follower of Jesus is also being connected to a local church. So the word Hope Church could be swapped out with local church, but since we are Hope Church, we're talking about people here doing these activities. So I worship at Hope on Sundays that I'm in town, and I think there's a wrong idea of the Lone Ranger Christian, again, which it's the dark side of the me and Jesus part. There is a me and Jesus part, but our Christian life is not just meant to only be done me and Jesus. We need to be in community. We need to be with other believers. We need to be getting together regularly to worship together. In fact, when I worship at Hope on Sundays, there's a lot of things happening. I mean, this is a place where I'm able to connect with other people. Some of the service takes place on Sunday mornings, not only exclusively on Sunday, and it's not only exclusively here, in the building where we are, but there's a lot of what will fuel our spiritual growth actually takes place on Sunday or gets started here on Sunday. You come, you meet somebody, you have a conversation, and then, a few months or so later, you realize, oh, we have a lot in common, and now I just met you a couple weeks ago or months ago, but now, wow, we're actually pretty good friends, and we're able to really strengthen and encourage each other.
And I know, like, from pre-COVID land, there's a lot of, you have to show up. And then I think there was this thing that happened during COVID when everybody had to be home. The only way to do church services was online. And I know for some that became the way to do church, that, well, I can get the exact same experience through my computer, my device, as I can if I show up to a building. And it sort of became the same, like, it's so old school to get in a car and drive somewhere. The new way is to just do online church. And I think, for when my family goes on vacation, we do want to tune in online to Hope Church because this is our church and these are our people and want to know what's going on. But it is not the same. I think post-COVID, it became very clear that being with people is as much a part of being a part of the church as is just listening to the message or hearing some songs that the band plays. There is, like you're saying, there's something about being around people and serving with them and checking in with them face to face, eye to eye, that you just cannot pull off. If the thing says is attend Hope Church when you're in town, you can attend church online too, like on vacation or whatever, but the best way is to actually get in a car, show up to where we are, and hang out with people and be in each other's lives.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a number of things. Fortunately, we live in Texas, so we've been post-COVID longer than other parts of the country. But there's just every time you had that first whatever again, where you were back together with a group of people, I mean, you realized, sure, we've been meeting together by Zoom, or we've been doing whatever, we've been streaming. It's just not the same thing. Even some conferences that we've attended that, maybe they weren't able to do it in person in the middle of COVID. And that very first time you could get back together, I mean, it was so good. Yeah. Well, I'm even thinking like, I'm in a pastor's coaching network, and we did it by Zoom, which was very convenient because we didn't have to travel. But the first in-person meeting that we had, it was like the time you get to hang out on the breaks and talk to people, go to meals. I mean, it's the same thing with church. After service, you see somebody, you talk to them. Maybe it's just a quick checkup on how you're doing in life, but there's encouragement. I mean, so it's why we're told to don't stop meeting together. And then the reason why it says, when I'm in town is because we expect people to go on vacation. We expect people that maybe they're sick, but so the online has given us a new dimension, so that we can be included maybe when we're not physically present, but it's not a substitute for actually being here. So, there's a very powerful thing that's happening, when we meet together. In fact, I mean, I think the thing, when you read through the New Testament, the assumption is that you're connected to a local church. Again, this idea of a Lone Ranger Christian is found nowhere in the Bible. The letters were written to churches, so the way you heard the scripture was, I was there, and this letter was read. I mean, the idea of the Lone Ranger Christian is really part of our modern thinking. But for thousands of years, it's you got to be a part of a local church, so you worship together. That's one of them. Another, I actively participate in a Hope group. I know groups have been a really key part of our church for the entirety of our church. In fact, this month, in January, our church will officially turn 45 years old. So for the last 45 years, groups have been a key part. I mentioned on Sunday groups, that's how we connect with each other and care for one another. And for some, some people come in, they're like, wow, Hope's a big church. Other people are like, well, Hope's a small church. But regardless, the number of people that are here on a Sunday during two services, you can't get to know all of them. And you and I were in group together in the fall. And just as we talked, we've known each other for, 15 plus years, and in group and having the discussions that we did. I don't know about you. I learned some things about you I never known, even though we've known each other this long. So it's where you really get connected with people. And then also to grow, we have to know other people and we have to be known. Because when you're putting on kind of a front, it's easy to think, oh, life's perfect. No, life's not perfect. We all have areas we need to grow in. And it could be that an area that I need to grow in is actually one that you're pretty good in, and vice versa. So you can help me grow in this area I need to, and then maybe I can help you grow in another area. So it's so important that we meet not just regularly for worship, but that we meet regularly with other groups of people.
Well, I find that I get into different kinds of conversations in group, and I'm introverted, so I'm always trying to find a good reason why I don't have to be in a group. The thought of it, like, oh, really? But then I go, and I get into, for lack of a better word, deeper conversations, because it's different than kind of the quick how are you on a Sunday morning. And these are people that you're not doing life together in terms of like, well, we work together and we are raising our kids at the same school. It's not that level, but we are checking in on each other on a weekly basis, and we're praying for each other. So there's updates on how is this thing going in your life and how is that. And there's just, you start building a level of trust in other people, and they have a level of trust in you. And the level of encouragement goes way up, and the level of stability, and the fact that it's happening midweek, whatever fuels your spiritual encouragement on a Sunday morning, we leak pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so you get that midweek connection with people who are also walking with the Lord. You get, a midweek encouragement and get another reminder yet again, like, I'm not crazy. I'm saying these other people are trying to also live in God's ways. And that helps, when you go home and you've got a spouse to relate to and kids to relate to do that in a God-honoring way instead of a selfish way.
Yeah, that's right. So another one of them was I serve on a ministry team at Hope. Again, because we're talking about Hope Church, but we serve on a ministry team, and one of the quick things I said in the message was we were not just saved from something, which is our sin, but we were saved for something, and that's to be involved in what God's doing in this world. And in fact, with a lot of these, what we find is you can fill in the blank. I blank because Jesus blanks. So Jesus, God, comes to this planet to serve, not to be served. So one of the ways that we emulate Christ and him being a servant is by us serving. And also as we serve, we get to be a part of what God's doing in this world. Again, God doesn't need us and then like, oh no, if Matt or Brian don't participate, it won't get done. But he lets us participate when we get to be a part of what God is doing. Like if we decide to sit on the sideline and do nothing, he'll find someone to do it. But when we do get in, we are able to be a part of what God's doing and then just receive blessings in return for doing that, And even there's times maybe I'm like, I didn't really feel like doing that, but man, I felt so good after doing that because I got to be a part and I got to see, and even there are all kinds of ways that people serve here on a Sunday morning. And, from being out in the parking lot greeting, we have a guest come in who's maybe they had a horrible week, hardest week of their life. And they got invited to church by a friend or a coworker, and their experience is started by having a smiling face in the parking lot, welcoming them in, and just going through all the different areas. So sometimes it can feel like we're doing something insignificant, but because it's a part of the kingdom, we get to be a part of the overall kingdom being built up. In fact, what we're doing here at Hope Church is a part of the larger kingdom of God on this planet. So I just think it's really important. Now, it's also, serving is countercultural. Like most American culture, why do you go to school? Well, so that you can be served, right? You get a higher education, so you get a higher job, so you don't have to do the dirty work. But then again, Jesus, before they had the Last Supper together, what does Jesus do? He turns around and washes the feet of all of his disciples. Again, modeling for them. He is God, but he served in that way. So it's one of the ways we get to actually practice being Christ-like in our service.
So you mentioned I can't remember now which message, because you have two services. Sometimes the sermon changes just a little bit, but
same outline, but
right.
Different fill-ins.
So, but you mentioned that an aspect of the new life in Christ is that you get spiritual gifting, and serving is one of those places where you get to use that. So when I first came to Hope, I did not come here to be on staff. I wasn't even thinking about being on staff at a church. And it was through serving that, I don't know that I found my gifting there because I had served in other churches and other capacities before that, but it was a way to use the things that God had gifted me with. And I think out of that, he brought about my understanding of my call into ministry. So it was I was already in motion, I guess, is to say, to see how God is leading. Now, that doesn't mean that as soon as you start serving, years down the line, God's going to call you into ministry.
Right.
But it is through being in motion, I guess, that God can direct your life and bring you into the places that he wants you to be.
Yeah, I think, for my story, when I was in college, I started helping out in some kind of administrative ways with the church. I'm you and I have this running joke. I'm not the worship pastor because I don't sing. I don't play any music or instruments. That's not where any of my gifting is. But I have administrative ability and I had some technical ability, and I was able to help out in some ways. I'm like, oh, wow, like I can use this in church. And I didn't even know that. So that kind of gave me a vision for serving. And what I knew at that time in my life in college when I discovered is like, I don't know what I'm specifically going to do, but I know I want to be serving in the local church for the rest of my life. What that also does for us, though, is there's a bit of a process of elimination. Like sometimes we think, well, I'll just sit here on the couch and I will somehow magically know what I'm good at and exactly how God wants to use me. And that could happen, but the way it most often happens is we start to get involved. We realize, like, maybe that's not for me, or I really like that. I didn't know I would like that. And then we get to be involved that way. So it's through, like you're saying, through motion of actually doing that, we discover even part of how God's made us. We can learn things about us. Like, I didn't know I really enjoyed that. I didn't know that that's who God made me to be and how he made me to participate in his work in the kingdom. So serving is, it is a very important thing. I think that it's one of those things, all of these on the list, they all have a lot going on, and we're just trying to kind of give some starting places for folks. Again, as we talked about in the context of maybe you were doing one of these, but you sort of fell off the radar because you got distracted, or you got busy, or you had some health issues, this last year, or maybe job had a real rough season and required a lot of extra work, and then it's peeled back now, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize I disengaged from one of these activities that as I do them all, I'm going to be experiencing spiritual growth. Another one on the list was I regularly pray for and invite friends and others to hope. And I think this is one of those ones where everybody kind of gets afraid of the word evangelism unless you really enjoy it, which is typically a smaller percentage of people. But when you really think about it, as a follower of Jesus, I've experienced this life transformation. I'm in the process of changing. Why wouldn't I want other people that I know and love and care about to be able to experience the same change that I've been experiencing? So in this case, the way this one's listed here is I regularly pray for and invite. And to me, that's kind of like the lowest level. Maybe I'm afraid to like share the gospel with somebody. They're going to ask me a question that I'm afraid I'm not going to know the answer to. Well, everybody can pray for somebody who doesn't know Jesus, or they're pretty sure they don't know Jesus. And then we can make an invitation. There's more to it. Like, it doesn't stop here. This is sort of like the gateway, the entry part. I pray for people in my life. And again, what we're not suggesting is you have to go out and find all these people, Brian. Who are your neighbors? Maybe relatives. If you got kids in the home, maybe some of your kids aren't even followers of Jesus yet, and you can, like, one of the people you're praying for is your kids. We pray for our kids that they would come to follow Jesus, and best we can tell, our two kids have. And then I had kind of a rough reminder one day. I remember it was right before one of our kids was going to be baptized. It was just a really rough week. I'm like, well, did they really make a decision to follow Jesus? And we made them wait like over a year till we could see some fruit. And then my wife and I were talking. We're like, well, we still sin and struggle, even though we're a follower of Jesus. Like, we're not now sudden perfect, so we shouldn't expect our kids to be. Like, yeah, but we're not having to find a bunch of people. Like, it's not extra work to go out and do it. You pray for the people in your life. You invite people in your life, into your life. Invite them to church. That's a part of it. Invite them over. Have a meal with them. Have a conversation with them. And then hopefully, and Lord willing, that will lead to other spiritual conversations where at some point you can actually share your story, share what Jesus has done in your life. And then may that lead to actually sharing the actual gospel with somebody. But it starts with praying for people and inviting them.
I heard of a concept along those lines in not a church context. I can't remember what it was in now, but it was talking about you want people to become sneezers, which I realized in our very virus conscious time, it sounds gross. But when you sneeze, you shoot out all kinds of droplets of things that in a disease capacity could get somebody sick. I think in this capacity, if you're sneezing your experiences out, you're trying to let as many people as know that this is really something that I've gotten value from, or this is something that I really like. And much like we would say, hey, I just listened to this new album, you should totally check this out. Or I checked out this restaurant, you should totally check it out. Or let's go, I just found this new place, I'll take you and we'll go. It's the same kind of thing where I think because of the spiritual aspect of it, we're nervous about spending the relational capital, I guess, for lack of a better term, although they think I'm stupid or weird or whatever. When we do it for all kinds of things that have no eternal value at all. And I think in a lot of cases, if they're your friend and you say, hey, this thing is going on at my church, I think you would want to be a part, they're not going to be offended. They're your friend.
Yeah.
Versus, I think the thing that I get nervous about is you're going to drop me off downtown and I got to go up to some person I've never met before and try to talk to him about Jesus. That's a hard sell. But telling a friend of mine, hey, there's this thing going on at my church, or there's this thing I got out of my quiet time, or there's this thing that happened, that's a lot easier because I've already got a level of respect and trust with that other person.
Yeah. I think sometimes we make it harder and more complicated than it needs to be. But so then the next to last one that I looked at is I give a regular offering in a God-honoring way at Hope. And we really didn't have time to dig into this one. And for some, this might be the most controversial one in the sense of like, well, some people think, well, all God wants is your money. God doesn't need our money at all. What God is ultimately after is our heart. And what we find, though, is there's a deep connection between our hearts and our wallets. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what that means is when we put our treasure, our money, into our cars, into our houses, into recreational activities, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with those things because we need a car to drive, we need a place to live, it's okay to have some recreation, but when we are investing all of our financial resources into those things, then that tends to be where our heart is. So there's this connection between our hearts and our wallets. Now, the truth is God owns it all anyway, and God will provide the resources to get the work done that he wants to do. He just reaches into our wallets as followers of Christ to fund the ministry that he wants to do. So an aspect of this is we see that the biblical standard in the Old Testament and in the New Testament is people supported the work of the church. In the Old Testament, it was the temple, and the giving was given to the church. So that's why it says, I give a regular offering in a God-honoring way at Hope Church. Notice it doesn't give a specific dollar amount. It doesn't give a specific percentage even. I mean, we believe in the tithe, 10%. But the key words here are God-honoring. And I just want to kind of explain that for a minute. I think there's really 4 elements of God-honoring. And you and I could give differently and both give God honoring when you look at these 4 aspects. So the first one is systematic. That means I have a system for giving, and typically the system is related to when we get paid. If we're not making any money, it's probably hard to give, right? But whether you get paid once a week, every other week, you get paid once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is, there's a system that's typically tied to giving that is related to when you receive your income. So it's systematic. It's proportional. I mean, that's where the tithe comes in, 10%. Whether you make $1,000, $50,000, $100,000, or $1 million, 10% is 10%. Now, 10% of that number is going to be different, but you and I could each give 10% off of a different total and still be giving a 10%. Sacrificial, there's an element of sacrifice, and we see this all throughout the Scripture. I'm not getting into any specific verses here, but just kind of a broad sweeping term, but there's an element of sacrificial. In fact, that's where right now we're in kind of the final stage of our Christmas offering, where for us at Hope Church, we give above and beyond our regular tithes and offerings for the Christmas offering. So for people who have given regularly off of their income, now they're giving above and beyond. They're giving sacrificially when it comes to the Christmas offering. And sometimes God just calls us to sacrifice. And I don't know about you, but I know there's been times where God's been like, you need to give such and such. And sometimes that we're specifically talking about to the church here, but sometimes he calls us to be sacrificial and generous in other ways. But then the fourth piece, we have systematic, proportional, sacrificial, and then cheerful. God loves a cheerful giver. And so if someone's wanting to start out in giving, I said, well, if you can't cheerfully give 10%, don't give 10%. Like, give whatever you can cheerfully give. And what I've found, I look forward to giving. And I think, Lord willing, we're on January 1. I think this last year, I may have given more than I've ever given in my life because I'm able to now. And that excites me to be able to give more. So this element of cheerful, like it's not a begrudging thing of like, oh, I have to give. It's, look what God has blessed me with and all that he's provided with me. And I get to help support the work that he's doing through the local church. And then I get to be a part of all these other things. And then may give to other causes and other things on top of that. But there's an element that we find in the New Testament that our giving is to be done sort of primarily to the local church. And then we give in other ways above and beyond that.
I think what you said about, where our treasure is, there our heart is. I know for me, the thing I want is my heart to be aligned with God. And it's very easy for me to align it on whatever that number is in my bank account. And I don't want, knowing that God has all the money and all those things, I don't want to fall into the misunderstanding that I am the sole provider for my life, and that if I don't have those numbers in my bank account, then I can't do whatever the thing is. So it's very easy for me to go, well, I do want to have a system, and we set up a system through the website, the church's website, where when I get paid, a certain percentage comes out of, so I don't have to think about it, because I don't want to get into the spot of, that money, I could think of a lot of good uses for that other than giving it to the church. And there's been any number of times I've looked at our finances, like, what the exact number is that we need to pay for these other things that we just can't seem to get to? It's the exact number of the tithe. It's almost like there's just this begging of my heart to go, maybe not give to the church this time. And I'm like, no, I don't know that I would say that I'm all that cheerful sometimes, but it is determined that the money is not going to get my heart. I'm going to keep my heart with God. And so I'm like, I am writing that check, or I'm giving, I'm texting the number in, or whatever that is, because I want to make sure that my heart stays committed to what God is doing and not give it over to the things that look like they satisfy, but they really don't. And it sort of mocks the idea that God is really the one who's providing for me. I start to think like, no, it's really me. It's all of my effort. It's because it's my hands doing the work. I don't see that God is actually the one providing that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to different people who fall in different places on this thing that I'm about to say. So wherever someone falls, I mean, you and I seem to be in the same camp on this, that I have automated my giving as well. Because, you know, of all of the spiritual disciplines, of all the things that we could do, this is one that, like, I can know that I am giving in a God honoring way because I've set it up to happen automatically. And I think it comes to like an attitude of, what are your priorities? You know, I mean, our bills are, a lot of them are automated, because like we want our water bill to be paid so we can take a shower. We want our electricity so we can have, you know, air conditioning, especially here in Texas in the summertime. So the things that are important to us, we automate them. So that's one that I have also chose to automate. We get paid on this day, and just a couple day after or so, then my gift is made. Some people don't like that because they think it takes away from the worship side. So my answer to that is, well, as the baskets are passed, you know, on a Sunday, then that's an opportunity when you put your connection card in the basket to just say, you know, God, thank you for the gift that I've already made, and like you can make it. But giving is actually part of worship. But it's an important thing. The last thing that I mentioned on the list is I obey. I do the next right thing, asking what's my next step. And this is so crucial because everyone has a next step to take every day. You know, we never somehow arrive on this side of eternity. Until we go to meet with Jesus, we are still becoming the person that we're becoming, which is hopefully more and more like Jesus. So what is the next step that I can take today? And it's not just what is the next step that I can take, but then it's actually taking that next step, which is where the obedience comes in. And probably my least favorite verse in the Bible is in James, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says, whoever knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, that's sin. So if I know the good, right thing that I need to do, but I don't do it, that I'm not being obedient, and I'm actually sinning. So I want to obey. As a Christ follower, you know, Jesus says, the one who loves me is the one who obeys me. It's not just like lip service saying, oh, I love you, Jesus. Well, how do you express your love for Jesus? You actually do the things that he says to do. You treat people the way he says to treat them. You don't do the things that he says not to do. So this obedience part is really, you know, it's last on the list, but it's, I think the Bible reading's at the top because it's the first place to start, but then obedience is at the bottom of the list because for the rest of our lives, we need to keep obeying, and we need to ask, what's the next step? And then the next one, and then the next one. And the really exciting thing about that, though, is you can look back, just like if we were going to walk somewhere and we turned around and looked back, we could see how far we've covered in the distance. And the same thing is true with spiritual growth, is as we take next step after next step after next step, you can turn around and look back and it's like, wow, look how I've grown. Now, you don't get into pride or arrogance over it, but you realize, wow, I am a different person than I was. You know, I'm not who I used to be, but I'm not yet who I want to be. I'm somewhere in the middle. So it's so they're actually on the handout. We put little check boxes, but it's not just like, oh, I just need to check all those boxes off and then I'm good for today or I'm good for this week. But these are the things. These are activities that will fuel our spiritual growth. As we do these, then we will be growing. If we don't do these things, then we're probably not growing very much, if at all.
Yeah. I think, you know, you're mentioning if you walk for a while, you arrive somewhere, but a lot of those steps between your starting spot and your ending spot, probably pretty ordinary and mundane, just left, right. I was, my family, we're weird. So for just family entertainment, there's this YouTube channel that we'll watch, and there's this gal who is renovating a house, and we just recently watched her recap of 2022 and all the things that she was able to do with the house. And she went back to last January, and it was just studs, and walked through these projects and those projects, and there are walls, there is tile on the floor, there's a fireplace. It almost looks like a whole house now. And it is amazing what she was able to accomplish just by doing the next step over the course of a year. It is also interesting how just doing something like, well, my next step is to continue having my quiet time every day, or my next step is to give my wife a smile when I come home from work. It is amazing over the course. We don't see the incremental change, but it is interesting. You look back, like the quote you mentioned in the message. I can't remember how the thing started, but the end of it was, but I'm glad I'm not the person that I was. It's amazing what God does in your heart and does in your perspective and does in your life over the time. And there are those moments where you do make big steps. There are big, huge, monumental moments where I know this next step is I really need to sit down with my friend and tell them about my relationship with Jesus. That's a big next step. But right after that, there might be a whole bunch of little mundane next steps after that. But it's through that God really does grow our hearts.
Yeah, and I think, just to kind of come full circle, I think you mentioned quiet time, spending time with God. I think that also is something that it's real easy for it to become like a formula, and I have to do it this way. In fact, one of the most common conversations I have with people, usually guys, because I do more one-on-one mentoring with guys, but is they get a couple years out of college and they've started their job and they're struggling with their quiet time because maybe they either became a Christian in college or they got discipled in college and they came down with this system, and the system required them to spend a certain amount of time in a chair in the corner of the room and read this way and journal this way. And if they don't do that, they count it a loss for the day. And life now, because they're working, because of their kids or whatever it is, like it doesn't allow them to do it that way. And then I peel it back and I say, what's the purpose of a quiet time? And then I remember one guy, he looked at me and he's like, I guess to connect with God. And I'm like, that's it, to connect with God. Like, you don't have to read a certain way, pray a certain way, journal a certain way. So sometimes we have these like really powerful quiet times. And maybe you got to read your Bible for an hour that day and you feel like God really spoke to you, but then maybe you don't have an hour the next day. This morning I woke up a little later than I intended to, and I spent some time with Jesus. It wasn't as long as maybe what I would have liked to, but I had the commitment that I'm going to spend some time with him. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to pray. And we did that. And tomorrow, hopefully I'll get up when I'm supposed to and I'll have a little bit longer. But taking it back to, it's about a relationship. It's about growing relationship. It's kind of the religion is all about rules and doing things certain way. Well, being a follower of Jesus is about having a relationship with him. It's getting to know him over time. And the more you know him, the more you trust him. And then you're able to trust him more and you get to know him more. So that's why I said at the end of the message, being a follower of Jesus it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we need to just keep taking next steps every day of our life on this side of eternity. And then ultimately, when we get to heaven, we'll be who we're supposed to be. But for here and now, we've got some things we can do to help us grow. Yeah, let me quickly mention too. I had listed several resources on the back of the handout. So there's a couple of books by Max Anders. He's got a couple of different series of books that are really good on just some basic things. And when I say basic, it's not like that it's so simple and elementary, but just like back to the basics, the fundamentals. So he's got this one, 30 Days to Growing in Your Faith. Another one is What You Need About Spiritual Growth. We already talked about the Bible in a jar, and you and I were talking at the break between the two services, and you said, I think we've got like 3 left for the second service. And I was like, well, you come to the early service and you get the resources, right? And then I linked to a couple of past sermons or series where we talked more in depth about some of the elements of some things. The Abide series was done in the spring of 2022. That talked more. We spent each week on knowing, being, and doing. So if that's an area someone's particularly interested in. And then this, The Christian Life in 1,000 Words by Max Anders, that came from the 30 Days to Growing Your Faith book. that in 1,000 words, he really describes kind of everything about the Christian life. And so I've got a printout here that I'm not going to read all 1,000 words, but starts out, he talks about what do you need to know, be, and do. So there are some things so vital to the Christian life that unless you know them, you cannot become a complete Christian. And he talks about that. And then he says, be, in the Christian life, we are gauged not merely by what we know or do, but who we become. This is about we're becoming more and more like Christ. And he talks about who we're to become. And then the last one is do. God calls on Christians to manifest their knowledge and character by doing the things he calls and gifts them to do. And then the third paragraph is about the doing. So I thought in 1,000 words, it was sort of the summary of the whole book in 1,000 words. So, and we got a link to that 1,000 word page in there. So anyway, depending on where people are at and kind of what they want to look at for this next year, those are some resources we put together.
And we'll put a link to all those resources along with a link to the full note sheet from the Sunday morning message in the show notes, so you can check those out. If you're listening or watching to this in real time, next Sunday, we're starting a series called Hope DNA. And can you give us a bit of a preview as to what is in that series?
Yeah. So we're going to take a look, really, we're kind of pop the hood open and really look at who we are as a church. It's a 5-week series, so we're going to take a first week really looking at our mission. What's our mission as a church? You tell everybody our mission every Sunday, but we're going to really expand on it, not just the simple statement, but what's really packed into that. We're going to look at our key values as a church. How do we make decisions? What are the things we're really trying to do? What's our strategy as a church? Strategy that we're working with. And then, really the Christian life is about transformation. So ultimately, what kinds of people do we want to see us becoming? So we'll take a look at kind of what some of the goals are there. Again, at kind of a high level as we do everything that we do. This is who we want to become. And then we'll ultimately take a look at kind of where we're headed for this next year or so, kind of some directional things as we start the new year.
Well, I'm excited about the series. I'm excited about the new year, and working on staff, I know a little bit more about what's coming even beyond the Hope DNA series, and I think it'll be very exciting and motivational for us as a church. So if you're in the Fort Worth area, we'd love for you to join us. Our physical location, because again, being here really is the best way to do this. We're at 1750 Beach Street. We're just east of downtown Fort Worth at the corner of Beach Street and I-30. We'd love for you to be a part of us. But until then, we hope you have a great week, and we will see you here next time.